Hello, everybody. This is Peter Sussman, and I'm doing a presentation on the area southwest of Lake Harriet, subtitled From Thornton's Resort to the Fulton Neighborhood. This is a hybrid of a in-person walking tour we did earlier this summer and some research that I've done. So you'll see some images of what we saw on the walking tour as we go through the presentation. The area, which is probably the most historic site in the neighborhood, is on the southwest shore of Lake Harriet, and that was the site of Mrs. Frances Thornton's home that she built in 1858. She came by way of New York from England, and she built this house, this brick house, with brick shipped in from Milwaukee at the time. And this was a combination of a working farm and an estate. And she took in boarders and visitors from St. Anthony Falls, from around the country, would come out to the countryside, to Lake Harriet, and would stay with her. So she owned the property into the early 1870s, but I want to focus initially on one episode that's been documented where a family from the South, the Christian family, brought their domestic slave, Eliza Winston, with them to St. Anthony Falls. Based on previous experience, the Southerners were expecting to not be hassled about that, even though Minnesota was a free state. And Eliza had met with, initially at St. Anthony Falls, a few abolitionist-minded citizens who were going to help her obtain her freedom, being in Minnesota. The Christian family got word of that, and they moved out to the countryside to Mrs. Thornton's boarding house at Lake Harriet, and they thought they wouldn't be found there, but indeed folks from town came and were able to locate Eliza, and she later testified that as she was directed, she understood they were not coming back to the Winslow house at St. Anthony Falls to stay anymore. And in her words, I thought one of the servants had made my master suspicious, and that he went away on that account. On the day I was taken by the officer, some men came out to Mrs. Thornton's, and I heard them tell that persons were coming to carry me off. So whenever any one of them was seen coming, my mistress would send me into the woods at the back of the house. I minded her, but I did not go very far, hoping they would find me. I was sent into the woods several times during the day, as was the case at the time when the party came who took me away. The subsequent ownership of the property was as Mrs. Thornton sold off portions of her very large land holdings around Lake Harriet, and that was the Reeve family. That's the name that may be more commonly familiar to some folks because Colonel Charles Reeve bought 240 acres from Mrs. Thornton, and he established a working farm that he called the Sunnyside Farm. Sunnyside is a name in the Linden Hills community because Jonathan Grimes in 1880 named one of the streets in his subdivision at the west edge of the neighborhood, Waveland, for the Sunnyside Farm. So Sunnyside Boulevard is still there today. Charles Reeve and his father were the property owners when the Minneapolis Park Board was established in 1883, and they, in effect, donated their shoreland to the Board of Park Commissioners, and they made a very specific request and condition of that and they wanted to maintain a gracious approach to their home, and that is in the form of a crescent, which name will come up later. And that is why, as you go around Lake Harriet at the southwest corner, there is the small additional park area, which is crescent in shape, which was the drive approach to originally the Thornton and then the Reeve House. Charles Reeve was very significant and well known locally. He was one of the founders of both the Lure Line Rowing Club on then Lake Calhoun, now referred to as Padaemakaska, and also was one of the founders of the Minnetonka Yacht Club out at Lake Minnetonka. So he used this home as his summer home. He had a home in town, and he had a home out at Lake Minnetonka. He actually stayed and maintained ownership of the home until 1913, when it was platted as Crescentwood. And I don't have specific documentation, but believe that the name came from that crescent-shaped property that the Reeve family donated to the park board back in 1885. This is a map showing the area around Lake Harriet in 1881, and you'll see the name Sunnyside for the Sunnyside Farm to the southwest of Lake Harriet. The city had not expanded either in terms of settlement or the area that was part of the city until the park board was established in 1883, at which point the city in 1883 and 1887 extended the city limits to incorporate then Lake Calhoun and Lake Harriet out to the present city boundaries at France Avenue, and eventually to 54th Street to the south. So all of what was Mrs. Thornton's property became part of the city of Minneapolis in the 1880s. And at that point, it was platted in several steps. The Reeves specifically platted in 40-acre parcels a number of subdivisions to the southwest, one of which was Lake Harriet Park. And that is the area which our walking tour focused on. This is a corner of what became the Fulton neighborhood. The Fulton neighborhood goes all the way out to 54th and France, but our tour just encompassed a few blocks right off of the Reeve home and incorporating up to 50th and Xerxes. That area, known as Lake Harriet Park, was platted in the 1880s, but most of the ownership was by speculators, and they owned small, either individual or groups of lots. Only 7 homes were built in that 40-acre subdivision up through the early 1900s. And of note are 3 homes that I want to bring up, which we visited on, or the sites of which we visited on our walking tour. The first of those has an interesting connection, very brief, as one of the original sites of the Lake Harriet School. As the city was expanding in the 1880s, it displaced the previous school provisions which the residents, few as they were, enjoyed as part of Richfield Township. And now as part of the city of Minneapolis, they had no school accessible to their families, to their school-aged children. So starting in 1887, the residents petitioned for those families in what they called the Lake Harriet District. There was a natural outflow from Lake Calhoun to Lake Harriet, and from that point going west to the outflow from Lake Harriet towards Minnehaha Creek, that is what they refer to as the Lake Harriet District. The very first Lake Harriet School in 1888 was located for a few years at what's now 45th and Beard, a home that had been built by the Grimes family as part of the Waveland addition. and it was unoccupied at the time. It came up to 1892, the fall of 1892, and the school board made arrangements to rent an unoccupied house at the corner of 49th and Upton. The difficulty was that there was some sort of epidemic or going around, and the very few number of students they had starting out in the fall of 1892 dwindled to the point where they had to shut the school down. One of the 7 original homes existing through the 1890s was used for the school, and it was moved from the corner to the third house now from the corner of 49th Street. And this photograph shows at the right-hand side, within that added on to and remodeled duplex is the original 1880s home that the Lake Harriet School was served as very briefly. So that's one of the 7 homes. 2 of the other 7 homes are of note because they were lived in by black families. And the first one I want to mention is at the corner of 49th and Washburn. And the 2 lots at that corner had been built on in the 1880s, but the owner who sold the property to the Burkus family was a man named Bedient, who had moved to Los Angeles at the time. So that was a private transaction conveying a house that had been built earlier to the Burkus family. They would be one of the first black families living in the area. And the Burkus family had to rebuild after a fire, and they maintained the property. The home that you see there is one which is existing, and that is at 4852 Washburn, the second lot from the corner. The 2 lots were both owned by the family. And so by 1913, the Burkus family had left the property, and the property, after some further fire damage, and a few years later, takes the appearance of what the house is now, including the stucco finish. That house is immediately across from Fulton School, which we'll talk about in a minute. The other home that was lived in by a black family was at 4832 Upton Avenue South. Now that home no longer exists. It was replaced in the mid-1930s by the family that bought the property from the Edwards family. That property from 1901 was owned by a black family named Crosell, and they lived there for several years until Mr. Crosell passed away. There are a few years where there are some tenants living at the property, but by 1911 or 1912, the Edwards family had acquired the property, and they actually lived in the house through the mid-1930s, becoming the last black family in the area southwest of Lake Harriet for many years. There has been some writing and research done about the conditions that black families faced in what is now the Linden Hills and Fulton neighborhoods. And remember, these areas were all platted in the 1880s during a period of considerable expansion of the city. And that was long before the introduction of racial deed restrictions from 1911 or 1912 onwards. So any real estate practices contributed to the number of black residents in these neighborhoods, and specifically a well-covered occasion in 1909-1910 at 45th and Zenith, where the neighbors organized, including the real estate interests, to discourage not only additional black families from moving in, but to encourage the few black families that I've just described. They would like to have them move out of the neighborhood as well. By 1913, this is a critical date, There are about 32 homes in that area of the same blocks that we're talking about. So the development is spreading from southward from Linden Hills, and there are a number of things that are happening concurrently. One is that with additional school-aged children, just as throughout the growing city of Minneapolis, which by 1910 reached a population of 300,000, school facilities had to be provided. And the Lake Harriet School was maxed out on its site at 42nd and Sheridan by 1911, the last addition to the school. And that school site was maybe adequate back in 1898 when it was acquired by the school system, but by 1910, 1911, it was no longer adequate, and expansion southward became the site of the Robert Fulton School. This is the point at which a boundary is defined between Linden Hills and Fulton, and Fulton becomes, through the school, an organizing factor for the neighborhood, which organized an improvement association in 1912, and a lot of activity grows around that because what they had initially were temporary classrooms, and this was common throughout the school system, but this was like a constant cycling of these wood temporary classrooms that were moved from site to site. And it wasn't until 1915 that a permanent brick and concrete structure was built, which you see in the historic photograph, and then added on to in 1925. But that is as the neighborhood continues to grow and expand beyond Linden Hills and outward towards the city limits, then at 54th Street in France, and then the appearance of the school today, that portion of it. Eventually, the school board acquired the south half of the block. Initially, it was just the north half, and in both instances, they had to buy individual lots or sets of lots from private property owners who had long ago bought the lots. This was not a large holding of a half block or an entire block that the school board could purchase at that time. Meanwhile, the community continues to develop, and in the 1910 period to 1920, the most common housing style in the Fulton neighborhood is the bungalow style. Many of these homes survive. Some have been altered either to enclose a front porch or add on to the house, but here are two near the Fulton School site, which are the present homes of families that have students at Lake Harriet. I get a kick out of what other development was latching onto here in this advertisement from 1913. So the Fulton School has been in existence since 1911, but it's really still temporary classrooms until 1915. However, this didn't stop Dickinson and Gillespie from advertising a week after the streetcar was extended from the Lake Harriet Loop at 43rd and Upton, coming south on Xerxes from between 43rd and 44th, up the hill and then back down the hill over to 50th Street at the beginning of October. And here a few days later, they're talking about this is the opportunity, buy, invest now. These are the prices for lots, $275 to $750 on easy terms. And it says school facilities are excellent and situated within a few blocks. I don't know that two temporary classroom buildings are excellent school facilities, but eventually the school system did catch up. And as we know, at 50th and Xerxes, where the streetcar was extended in 1913, and then it turned to the east to Penn Avenue the next year, sort of an extension of the 43rd and Upton and 44th Street commercial districts of Linden Hills took place. Back in the 1880s, there had been a proposal to extend a streetcar line around Lake Harriet. Initially, it would have been the steam motor line, but then it would have been the electric streetcar. but it took until 1914 before a streetcar service extended all the way south around Lake Harriet. It was the Bryant Avenue line coming off of Bryant Avenue at 50th that connected at Penn Avenue where there'd be a transfer. Another thing that moved south from Linden Hills over the years was that the historic fire station was outgrown, and Station 28 was built at 50th, just off of 50th and Upton here at the corner. So things are moving south. The rest of this presentation deals with the properties that we've visited on our walking tour. And at the bottom is a panoramic view from the crescent at Lake Harriet that the Reeve family donated to the Board of Park Commissioners up the hill where we saw the original photograph of the Thornton home. And we were hosted by the present owners of the property at the corner who have a good part of their front yard as part of the property. So that is the panoramic view. That's where we gathered and were hosted at the beginning of our tour. The tour began going up Thomas Avenue, and those initial blocks are more similar to the development closer to Lake Harriet, going to the south and to the east than the rest of the Fulton neighborhood. There were 2 blocks that remained owned by the Reeve family up until 1913 when they platted those 2 blocks as Crescentwood. If you go from Russell to Thomas, from the Lake Boulevard up to 49th Street, you'll see that those are larger lots and much more expensive homes than much of the rest of the neighborhood. So at the top, I've got views of 3 homes that are along the block that were built in 1916 or just thereafter. The 2 homes on the left have an interesting history because they were built in 1916 at the same time by Mrs. Lucy Waterman. And I was curious about who that might be. I've got a little bit more information now since the walking tour, but she had been living in South Minneapolis. She had been widowed by 1900, and another person who shared the household, they decided that it would be time to build on this nice new area. And so it was the same architect and same builder, homes built at the same time, one for Lucy Waterman and one for the family. I believe it would have been her stepson. I'm still trying to establish that. But you can see a number of similarities, the house on the corner and the house next to that at 4846 and 4854 Thomas. The other unique property that caught my eye was this property. Joseph Almars built this home for himself. At the time, he was just ending a partnership with Mr. Lindstrom, so the firm had been called Lindstrom and Almars, and Almars lived in the home into the 1940s when he passed away, but it was at this transitional point where the style that he chose was the Prairie School design, popular at the time, that you'll see several examples by Purcell and Elmsley designed in that era in the early 1910s. This lot is actually part of Crescentwood, and Almars continued on in publishing and design. He made a shift from architectural design into design more broadly, and ran a number of schools in that had applied art design. Another change with the availability of land in the Fulton neighborhood here was that when the Lake Harriet Methodist Church built its present building, built in 1916 at the corner of 44th and Upton, the original church building was moved to 49th and York. And it has been there ever since. It was the English Lutheran Church in 1916 when it moved to the corner, and it is presently the Dharma Field Zen Center. As in much of the southwest area, Fulton has seen a number of teardowns. This is historically something that has been going on since the 1880s, but accelerated over the last 15 years or so. And what you'll see, as the example in the lower left-hand corner shows, is that the scale varies quite a bit, sometimes side by side, where a new home overwhelms its neighbor. But there are many homes. As a matter of fact, the texture of most of the area that we walked through includes homes from the early 1900s and, as I mentioned, the bungalow style in particular. We went down the 4800 block of York to show the range of conditions that have been present and how that has influenced the character of the homes. If you look at the topography around Lake Harriet, the area to the southwest includes some very low-lying areas that are just relatively close to the lake level, and they were naturally marshland areas, wetlands, and that extends out to Pershing Field, just west of this area on Zenith. So these areas, as much as most of the neighborhood has alleys, the low spot of the neighborhood is in the center of this block, and so there was no way of regrading the entire block, and there's no alley behind. So the character of this block has always had, in the absence of garages coming off of an alley and back, either a small garage in back where that's possible, or street-facing garage stores. Almost the entire block, I think 9 homes on this block, especially on the east side, have been torn down recently and rebuilt. So you have a very dominant auto character to this little corner of Fulton neighborhood, and to the point where at the corner of 49th and York, there's a home at the corner where the part of the home where that houses the garage is actually disguised or partially disguised on the street frontage at York, here at the lower right-hand corner. One other character is that although the neighborhood was platted in the 1880s, individual property owners could come along and reorganize, combine lots, and especially along 49th Street, there are several examples east of York Avenue where the property owners rotated the lot configuration so that they're either north or south facing onto 49th Street. Here are 3 homes between Xerxes and York of that type. And then we had the pleasant experience of running into the property owner here later on the tour at 48th and Vincent, and several people on the tour knew this homeowner and knew that he had won numerous awards for his landscaping. And so this is a home that was built before 1920, fairly classical in appearance, that has been lovingly maintained, and very extensive gardening. And around the corner is unique for this area, which is a surviving garage that would go up to his back property line that was built for a Model T era car. So he has the small pavers leading up to the garage just outside of his garden area. That gives you a brief overview of the homes that we toured earlier this summer. And what I enjoy about the walking tours there are several things about the firsthand experience. And we appreciate August videotaping these programs, including this one, for the past several years. It would be a challenge to actually videotape a walking tour, but the experience of uh, the pacing of it and seeing things change as you walk by and things that you notice. You might have somebody on the tour who has grown up, lived in the neighborhood at one time or another, who has a personal story to relate. Um, so those are all things that there are advantages and disadvantages to both a presentation, where our Linden Hills History Study Group has typically had programs at St. John's, and we appreciate their hosting that. But there are also advantages to the tours I've done over several years in parts of the Linden Hills and also surrounding neighborhoods, including Fulton.